Dasya Jananjana Shalakaya Chakshuranmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Katamayam Tadati Swapadantikam Panchakalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyevacha Titanam Bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. We are concluding chapter 4 of the Bhagavad Gita today. And we're beginning with a very famous verse where Krishna says to Arjuna, Tadvidhi panipatena pariprashnena sevaya upadekshanti te jnanam jnaninas tattvadarshinaha. Just try to learn the truth by approaching a spiritual master. Inquire from him submissively and render service unto him. The self-realized soul can impart knowledge unto you because he has seen the truth. Like I said, a very famous verse about the importance of the spiritual master. And in the purport, Prabhupada, a very famous sentence is there. In this verse, this is towards the end of the purport. In this verse, both blind following and absurd inquiries are condemned. Not only should one hear submissively from the spiritual master, one must also get a clear understanding from him in submission and service and inquiries. A bona fide spiritual master is by nature very kind to the disciple. So blind following, so we're not meant to just blindly, yes, whatever. We are meant to develop reasonable faith through, as in the 9th chapter, Krishna says, pratyaksha, through direct perception by practicing bhakti properly. But we're not looking for people in our society to be, just sentimental and not philosophical. Now, that doesn't mean that everyone has to be a scholar, right? Although you are all taking Bhakti Shastri, but one can also be very simple-hearted and chant Hare Krishna like that. But to just blind, but it should be still either experienced or studied through Krishna's words. Prabhupada performed such austerities to write these books. It's not, we take them for granted. We all have on our bookshelf maybe the whole Bhagavatam, the whole Chaitanya Charitamrita, and we almost like walk by them every day. But without kind of recognizing or acknowledging the austerities that Srila Prabhupada performed, getting up around 12 or 12:30 in the morning and translating until 4 every day at a very, very old age, elderly age. Because he said, I've written these books for you to study. And he would, so blind following is condemned, and so is absurd inquiries. Just even not so absurd, but we should even be careful of this. You go to a class and the class is on a specific topic, and then you ask a question that has nothing to do with the class. Now it may not be absurd, but it's still not really appropriate. Unless one could say, if there's no question, one could say, well, Prabhu Maharaj, I do have a question. It wasn't exactly, if you say that, that's not so bad. But as a general rule, inquiries should be, it's just like that time when a person said to Prabhupada, so the spiritual master is supposed to know everything. Yes. Well, can you tell me how many windows are there in the Empire State Building, which is a famous building in America? And Prabhupada gave that's an absurd inquiry. And still Prabhupada gave the perfect answer. He said, how much water is there in a mirage? That was his answer. So we should be inquiring and hear submissively and get a clear understanding by submission, service, and increase. Now, we might ask that in our society, it's not so easy. I think probably a number of you are disciples of His Holiness Jayapataka Maharaj, and it's not so easy to get time with him. We can't necessarily sit at his feet every day and hear a class and ask questions. He through his whole life, even after his stroke, he's always traveling, and he's got so many tens of thousands of disciples. So one might ask, how am I going to apply this verse to my life? Because so how am I going to render service unto him? How am I going to inquire submissively? Well, that is the challenge of a Paribrajacharya, one who's always traveling and preaching and having so many disciples. So there are Diksha Gurus and there are Shiksha Gurus, and they are to be respected similarly. So we should have someone who's more advanced than us, who we can talk to, who we can inquire from, who we can serve, who we can have a honest and even a frank discussion with. That we should all have some people in our lives like that, who can act in that way. They don't have to be a great devotee like His Holiness Jayapataka Maharaj or someone like that, but someone who's more advanced than us. That's how we could apply this and have them as like giving us shiksha, giving us direction, and also just getting someone who knows us well and knows our strengths, knows our weaknesses, because we all have strengths, we all have weaknesses. And in this way, make advancement in Krishna consciousness. So, any questions or comments on that? Okay. So then the next verse. So what happens after you have that? You've done that. Yad gyatva na punar mohan evam yasi pandava yena bhutani yasheshani drakshas yatman yato mayi. Having obtained real knowledge from a self-realized soul, you will never fall again into such illusion. For by this knowledge, you will see that all beings are but a part of the Supreme, or in other words, that they are mine. So this is real knowledge, to understand that we are parts of Krishna, we are His, and we are parts and parcel, meaning we're simultaneously, we come from Krishna, in one sense we have that oneness, and parcel, we're separate from Krishna, and our connection is bhakti, is seva. And this is a very powerful sentence. Talk about it. This is the second sentence in the purport. The sense of an existence separate from Krishna is called maya. Ma means not, and ya means this. Some think that we have nothing to do with Krishna, that he is a great historical personality, and that the absolute is an impersonal Brahman. So any sense, this is a very high realization. Anything that we think is not related to Krishna, doesn't help, we're not thinking of Krishna, that is Maya. That is Maya. So we have a long way to go where we completely get rid of this sense of an existence separate from Krishna. And then later in the last paragraph, about 4 or 5 sentences down, Prabhupada writes, the whole teaching of the Gita is targeted towards this end, that a living being is Krishna's eternal servitor, cannot be separated from, that a living being as Krishna's eternal servitor cannot be separated from Krishna. This is the same point. And his sense of an identity apart from Krishna is called Maya. The living entities as separate parts and parcels of the Supreme, there it is, parts and parcels, have a purpose to fulfill. What is that purpose? Having forgotten that purpose since time immemorial, they are situated in different bodies as men, animals, demigods, etc. Such bodily differences arise from forgetfulness of the transcendental service of the Lord. But when one is engaged in transcendental service through Krishna consciousness, one becomes at once liberated from this illusion. So Maya turns us away from Krishna. And then we consider ourselves independent of him. But we are eternally his parts and parcels. We come from Krishna, part, and we are eternal individual units, parcels. We need his shelter. We need his service. Thus, a really exalted devotee thinks, I am Krishna's and Krishna is mine. So now the next verse describes another benefit that we get from transcendental knowledge. We go beyond pap, we go beyond sin. Api ched asti papebhya sarvebhya papa krit tamaha sarvam jnanam plavenaiva Vrijinam santarishyasi. Even if you are considered to be the most sinful of all sinners, when you are situated in the boat of transcendental knowledge, you will be able to cross over the ocean of miseries. And again, another one of Prabhupada's famous sentences, the first sentence, proper understanding of one's constitutional position in relationship to Krishna is so nice that it can at once lift one from the struggle for existence, which goes on in the ocean of nescience. So if you remember back in chapter 1, Arjuna was afraid of sinful reactions. And now Krishna here is telling Arjuna the cure. It's transcendental knowledge. It's not leaving the battlefield. And these words, you see this a few times in the Gita, these words, apichet, means like even if. So it's used to say that even if something's very, very unlikely, almost impossible. So here, it's almost impossible that if you're the most sinful of all sinners and be in the boat of transcendental knowledge. But even if that was possible, if you're in the boat of transcendental knowledge, you will cross over nescience. So Krishna is using apichet to glorify this purifying effects of transcendental knowledge. So we have this constitutional and conditional parts of our life. Conditional is our our body and our identity. I'm a man, I'm a woman, I'm American, I'm Indian, I'm a IT professional, I'm a house wife, I am this, I am that, and these are all our conditional nature, or Chaitanya Charan Prabhu calls it our what was the word used? Functional nature, as opposed to our fundamental nature. Our fundamental or constitutional position is Krishna's eternal servant. And so Prabhupada is talking about that in this first sentence where he said, proper understanding of one's constitutional position in relation to Krishna is so nice that it can at once lift one from the struggle for existence. So, and then as much as possible, our functional or our conditional nature, we can try to connect that to Krishna. And that's what Varnashram is all about, right? That you're not eternally a grihasta, you're not eternally a brahmachari, these are not your eternal nature, but temporarily you're in that position. So we take that, let's say we're a grihasta, we take that and we bring up our children in Krishna consciousness. We are kind to our family members. We engage them in devotees. We make our house a holy place, etc. And that's how we connect the conditional with the constitutional, or the functional with the fundamental. But not forgetting the fundamental, that we are not this body. We are the soul. This weekend, one of the things I was doing last weekend was visiting a devotee who is leaving his body. He has cancer. Young man, also 40 years old, has 2 young daughters. It's very sad. But and he's getting close to the end. So, one of our, the devotees who are visiting him, goal is to say, okay, let go of your relationships, let go of your concerns about this world, let go about how people will take care of, and don't be fearful about the future. Be focused on Krishna in the present. This is a time to be firmly focused on your constitutional position. And he was saying, I don't know, in India, do you get Netflix?
Yes,
no one, everyone's afraid to admit that they know yes. But so he was saying, he said to me the other day, he said, I have no taste at all anymore for Netflix. I only want to hear Krishna's name or hear it talk about Krishna. He was very fixed, actually, even though he's gone through so much and he's relatively young. So he was getting fixed in his constitutional position. And here Prabhupada says that it's so nice that it once lifts one from the struggle for existence. Okay, so we covered a few verses there. Any questions or comments?
I just one doubt you can clarify. Prabhu, the purpose of the human life is to, we read in several slokas, is to understand the self and the supreme self, and finally to go back to the Godhead. Right. But Prabhu, why Bhagavan has created an obstacle in the form of Maya, which pulls us down. Whenever one step we go up, it pulls us down. Why is that? Doesn't Bhagavan want us to go back to the Godhead that easily? What is the purpose of this Maya, Prabhu, then?
Because he does not love means free will. If you put a gun to somebody's head and say, love me, that is not really love. So we chose, there's a nice verse in Bengali, Krishna Buddhi Se Jeev Anadi Bahir Mukh. So Bahir, I think basically it's saying we have turned our back on Krishna like this. Right? So we desired to be separate from Krishna. We desire to be in the center. It is said, I think I mentioned this before, that the mind is like a perverted reflection of the spiritual world. The spiritual world, Krishna is the center. Prabhuji, have you ever seen the Rasa Leela dance, the picture painting? Ram Krishnan, have you seen? Yes, no? Maybe he's frozen.
Sorry, Prabhu, I some interruption in network. I lost a few minutes.
Your connection is not so strong.
Missed.
Or maybe you've been to Mayapur and you've seen the altar there. There's Krishna.
Yes, Prabhu. Yes.
And then he has Radharani, and then he has the Astasaki. It's very clear Krishna is the enjoyer. It's very, when I see that altar in Mayapur, or similarly in Tirupati, because they also have Astasaki. Krishna is clearly the enjoyer. He's surrounded by all these beautiful women. But we want to be Krishna, and we want to enjoy. And therefore, we choose Maya. So it's just like the government doesn't enjoy creating prisons, right? It's not that the government is a great thrill. Oh yes, we want to build so many prisons because we want to put, but it's a necessity because some people have chosen to act like criminals and therefore they belong there. So Krishna doesn't take any great pleasure in creating the prisons of this material world, the jail of this material world, but it is a place for us to give us a chance to be rehabilitated and to come to him. So Krishna creates Maya because there's living entities who desire to be an illusion. Okay.
But Prabhu, is it because of the presence of Maya we are having this distraction, but for which you would not have?
Yeah, well, Maya also means mercy, because if everything was really easy, when you really have to fight hard and struggle to obtain something, then the tendency is to really value that which you have eventually obtained. But if you get it very easily, okay, well, I'm a pure devotee. Now let me take up harmonium lessons, take up something else. I already got that out of the way. Now let me, learn, how to drive a race car or whatever, anything. But because it's a challenge, and Maya is always testing our sincerity and our determination, and that helps us become stronger in Krishna consciousness. So she has a duty as given to her by Krishna, like that. So it's a very good question. I hope that was helpful.
Thank you.
Other questions, comments?
Oh, there's one in the chat box.
Oh, thank you. When someone is serving Krishna's energy, Maya, that's similar, right? Well, Krishna has material energy and spiritual energy. In the 10th chapter, verse number 8, Krishna says, Aham sarvasya prabhavo matas sarvam pravartate. I am the source of all spiritual and material worlds. So we're serving Krishna indirectly. Just like someone who is in prison, they're serving the government, but not the way the government would like to be served. Right? They're serving the government by following the orders of the government to be in the prison. But it's not the desire, it's not what the government really wants. Okay, so it's the same question actually. So Maya is is an agent of Krishna to try to keep us in illusion, to test to see if that's what we really want. Do we really, 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 really want Krishna or not? Okay, then we can continue. (37) Yatai dhamsi sa nidhognir Vashma sat puruterjuna Kyanagni sarva karmani Vashma sat purute tata. As a blazing fire turns firewood to ashes, O Arjuna, so does the fire of knowledge burn to ashes all reactions to material activities. So Prabhupada writes, this fire not only burns up all reactions to impious activities, but also all reaction to pious activities. Because to go back to Godhead, even material piety gets in the way, ultimately. Now, it's better to be materially pious than materially impious, right? But bhakti is transcendental to both of them. And bhakti cuts the reactions to both so-called good and so-called bad karma. Okay. And then the next verse, Nahi kanena sadrisham pavitram iha vidyate tat swayam yoga samsiddha kalenat mani vindati. In this world, so again, glorifying transcendental knowledge, there is nothing so sublime and pure as transcendental knowledge. Such knowledge is the mature fruit of all mysticism. And one who has become accomplished in the practice of devotional service enjoys this knowledge within himself in due course of time. Prabhupada writes, this knowledge is the mature fruit of bhakti, of devotional service. And when one is situated in transcendental knowledge, he need not search for peace elsewhere, for he enjoys peace within himself. In other words, this knowledge and peace culminate in Krishna consciousness. This is the last word of Bhagavad Gita. So the word kalena means in due course of time. So Krishna is actually using this word so that we don't think we just need to take sannyas tomorrow, move into the ashram, forget about my wife and kids, or forget about my husband and kids. No, that's Krishna. Kalena means, in due course of time, one becomes fixed in knowledge and free from pap. So Krishna is encouraging us to do detached work, which we're going to hear about in the beginning of the next chapter, and not just, take the outer markings of a sannyasi or something like that. Krishna will gradually reveal himself to us if we follow the path of bhakti. So then in 39, Krishna explains the role of faith. Shadhava labhyate jnanam tatpara samyatindriyaha jnanam labdva param shantim achirena digacchati. A faithful man who is dedicated to transcendental knowledge, so a faithful man, and who subdues his senses is eligible to achieve such knowledge. And having achieved it, he quickly attains the supreme peace. So here Krishna is telling us the qualifications of someone to obtain transcendental knowledge: being faithful, being dedicated, and having sense control. Okay, so those three things: faith, dedication, sense control. And without faith, the next verse tells us what happens. chas shraddhanascha Sanshayatma vinashyati. Nayam lokosti na paro na sukam sanshayatmanaha. But ignorant and faithless persons who doubt the revealed scriptures do not attain God consciousness. They fall down. For the doubting soul, there is happiness neither in this world nor the next. Prabhupada writes in the beginning of the purport, out of many standard and authoritative revealed scriptures, the Bhagavad Gita is best. Persons who are almost like animals have no faith in or knowledge of the standard revealed scriptures, and some, even though they have knowledge of or can cite passages from the revealed scriptures, have actually no faith in these words. And even though others may have faith in these scriptures like Bhagavad Gita, they do not believe in or worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Such persons cannot have any standing in Krishna consciousness. And skipping 2 sentences, men without faith in God and his revealed word can find no good in this world, nor in the next. For them, there is no happiness whatsoever. So there's a little difference here between 3 words about faith. One is agya, the ignorant. One is faithless, ashraddhana. And then there's the doubters, sanshayatmana. So the agyas, they're like animals, just don't get it at all. The ashraddhanam, they have some knowledge of Shastra, but they've seen, so many different theories based on it and so many different interpretations like that. They don't trust any of them. And then the Sanshayatma, they have faith, but they sometimes have this doubt that I don't know whether this process will be effective in my case, for me, although they may have faith in it in general or knowledge about it. So, having doubts, I think we've all explained this. I mean, we all experience this. If we do have some doubts, they don't make us happy. And we also said earlier that for doubts, we shouldn't just sweep them under the carpet or just say, no, I should just have faith. We should get a reasonable explanation so that our doubts can be satisfied. Because in the next verse, Krishna talks about how to destroy these doubts, right? He says, yoga sang yasti karmanam jnana sanchina sangshayam atmavantam na karmani nipadhanti dhananjaya. Therefore, the doubts which have arisen in your heart out of ignorance should be slashed by the weapon of knowledge. Armed with yoga, O Bharata, stand and fight. So he's saying you should fight, but he's not like just trying to get him, just go out there and fight too big, go out there. No, he's saying be fixed in knowledge and be a yogi. Prabhupada writes, long purport, but I'll just read. When we come to spiritual activities, we find that there are also divided into 2. So we talked about, this is different. Namely, understanding one's own self, one's constitutional position, and the truth regarding the Supreme Personality of Godhead. One who follows the path of Bhagavad Gita as it is can very easily understand these 2 important divisions of spiritual knowledge. So there's the understanding that I'm spirit, soul, part and parcel of Krishna, and then the whole understanding of the whole picture of Krishna. He plays a flute, and he has loving relationships with the gopis, and he plays with the cowherd boys, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So both knowledges are there. So questions, comments on all those things that we just covered?
Hare Krishna Prabhuji. So Shloka 41, is that a reference to Nishkama Karma Yoga?
41. One who acts in devotional service, renouncing the, yes. Yes, but Prabhupada always brings it to bhakti because ultimately that's what that leads to. So one who acts in renouncing the fruits of his action and whose doubts have been destroyed by transcendental knowledge. Yes.
So does that by extension mean that all Jnana yogis are practicing Nishkama Karma Yoga?
They are or they are not?
No, they are. Is that my question is that the next logical conclusion, that all Jnana yogis are practicing?
No,
No,
not at all, because that's what we're going to learn in that same question in one sense is what begins in the 5th chapter, that he's saying what's better, Nishkam Karma Yoga or Gyan.
okay.
And it's tricky because, well, it's not two different processes. It's two different steps in the process. But Krishna is again and again, as we're going to find out in just a few verses, emphasize that you should be active, not that you should renounce and go to the forest, but you should understand this transcendental knowledge, know about him until you're very advanced, keep engaging, in this world, engaging your senses in Krishna's service. And that's going to be much more practical and much better than renouncing the world. And there's a big, big danger in renouncing the world when our heart is not pure, right? Just like, let's say, there's a grihasta, and then the man takes to Krishna consciousness and becomes kind of fanatical, right? And then he thinks he wants to just leave his family and, move into the ashram or something like that. The problem with that is that he still often has material desires. And let's not move into this analogy may not be the best one, because if he's actually absorbed in bhakti, he might get a higher taste. But the idea is for the Jnani that if they prematurely renounce everything and their heart is impure, they're again going to fall down. And it'll be embarrassing for them because they were a Jnani, they might have taken sannyas, they may be a Babaji or this or that, and their heart is not pure yet. So that's why Nishkam Karma is so much more practical. Other questions, comments?
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji, Dandavat Pranam. Prabhuji, I have a question on the shloka number 42. Here Lord is mentioning that the doubts which have arisen in your heart out of ignorance should be slashed by the weapon of knowledge. So just wanted to understand, Prabhuji, where to draw the balance when we say the doubts to be clarified by the weapon of knowledge. That's one thing. And the second part is, many times doubts gets clarified when we engage ourselves in the devotional service, when things gets revealed to us. So how do we, understand and where to create a balance that by knowledge doubts needs to be clarified or by performing devotional service? Thank you, Prabhuji.
Well, knowledge, if we're reading Bhagavatam, reading Chaitanya Charitamrita, reading Nectar Devotion, reading Bhagavad Gita, that is devotional service.
Okay.
Right, for us, that is devotional service. And in those literatures, it's going to tell us about how we're not this body, how we are spirit souls, how we're meant to serve Krishna with love and devotion. But the actual process of reading Bhagavad Gita, the actual process of reading Srimad Bhagavatam is devotional service.
Thank you, Prabhuji.
Mm-hmm. Other questions, comments?
So Prabhuji, if we have to summarize what chapter 4 is about,
Transcendental knowledge.
this is transcendental knowledge, but it's not. It's a mixture of Nishkama Karma Yoga and Jnana Yoga. I mean, depending on the trajectory of the conversation, that's how Krishna is actually.
Well, no. In the 9th chapter, in the 9th verse, Krishna is talking all about knowing it's all about bhakti, right? Janma karma chame divyam yo, janma karma chame divyam, evam yo no. That's my Sanskrit my memory is not what it used to be. So, oops, my computer is also not what it used to be. It's going crazy. Stop. This is funny. It just, there we go. 4:9. Janma karma tivme divyam evam yo veti tattva takta deham punarjama naitima me visorjana. One who knows the transcendental nature of my appearance and activities. So this is all about bhakti. It's nothing to do with nishkam or anything. This is bhakti. This is hearing about Krishna's appearance and his activities. So it's that knowledge that leads to love. The next verse says, Puta mad bhavam agataha. Mad bhavam is translated as transcendental love. So that's also about bhakti. So we can't say this chapter is only about, Nishkam. And the next verse is how Krishna reciprocates with us. So there's different aspects of this chapter. And the question that you have is going to be clarified in the early verses of the 5th chapter. It's very similar, the early verses of the 5th chapter, similar to the early verses of the 3rd chapter, but with some added information in the 5th chapter.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
All right, Navadip wants. Okay, other comments, questions?
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Yes.
Prabhuji, many a times we know, likewise, we are diagnosed of diabetes, but we know that we are in danger. We know we are fallen in Maya. But still, when we see a gulab jamun or something, so we run until we taste it. We know it is not good for us, but even then we are falling. So this kind of Maya, what is the actual remedy that we take to actually, I don't know, Prabhuji, to ask this question, how to put this question across.
Well, it's a good question. Krishna says, remember we studied this in the 3rd chapter, Arjuna had the same question about you, as you, right? In, I think it's chapter 3, verse 36. Right? He said, O descendant of, by what is one impelled to wrong activities, to sinful acts, even unwillingly, as if engaged by force? And Krishna's answer in text 37 is the modes of material nature. Kama esha, krodha esha, rajo guna samudbhavaha. Especially the mode of passion, which degrades into the mode of ignorance, it covers our intelligence, and our mind becomes stronger than our intelligence. Because the mind says, I want those gulab jamuns. And the intelligence is saying, no, you're diabetic. This is terrible for you. And the mind says, I'll do exercise tomorrow. The mind makes up so many excuses. This is just this one time, no problem. I'll start tomorrow. This isn't so bad. Oh, I've eaten so well before. I've only been having khichdi and upma. So I've been very good. So this is just a little treat for me. So we make up so many different excuses, and it's the mind being stronger than the intelligence. The intelligence knows better. It's that little voice that we hear saying, don't do this. It's not good for your health. It's temporary. You're not going to be happy afterwards. You're going to feel guilty. And the mind says, Bhag me. For now, let me do. So it is the conditioning, especially by the lower modes of material nature. So at least we try to act we've talked about this so many times, in a sattvic way. When we're sattvic, cool and calm and thoughtful, then we can say, oh, that gulab jamun looks really good. Hare Krishna, let me just take a tulsi leaf from there and not take the gulab jamun. I'll leave it for the younger crowd. Like that. But a lot of it's the lower modes that push us in this way. And so we want to develop sattva, keep our place clean, keep our mind clean, wear clean dress, everything clean. And then it will be a lot easier for our intelligence to control the mind. Is that all right, Prabhu?
Yes, Prabhuji. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Murari Madhava Prabhu has written, how Jnani Misrita Bhakti, as per NOD, is hindrance to Bhakti or Krishna consciousness. I'm not sure what you mean, Jnana Mishra Bhakti. It's not pure, but it may not be a hindrance. It may just not be the highest status. Jnana Mishra Bhakti means you're doing some devotional service, but you actually really have some inclination still towards the impersonal. You may not like to do bhakti in the association of other people, things like that. I'd have to see the exact reference, Murari Madhava Prabhu, if you could find that, so that I could better explain. That's it in a nutshell. What else? Okay, so then we finish chapter 4. And we will go on to chapter 5. But let's just take a 5-minute break before we go on to the next chapter. Okay?
Yes.
Be back at 25 after the hour. So, chapter 5. And the connection between chapter 4 and chapter 5 is an interesting one. Because we heard about, remember action in inaction and inaction in action? I think that was verses 16 to 18 of the chapter 4. And then in 41 that we just read a few minutes ago, Krishna glorified both Gyan and renunciation. But then in the last verse of verse 42, which we just did, Krishna was telling him that he's got to fight. So we begin chapter 5 in the same way that we began chapter 3, with Arjuna asking a question: which is better, to work or to renounce work? And Krishna is going to explain the answer to that in chapter 5, in the beginning of chapter 5. So let's go there 1 second. So, Arjuna Uvacha, Sangyasam Karmana Krishna, Punar Yogam Chasang Shashi, Yat Shreya Etayor Ekam, Tad Me Bruhi Sunishtitam. Arjuna said, O Krishna, first of all, you ask me to renounce work. And then again, you recommend work with devotion. Now, will you kindly tell me definitely which of the two is more beneficial? So Prabhupada gives a little explanation of the different chapters. In the fifth chapter of Bhagavad Gita, the Lord says that work in devotional service is better than dry mental speculation. Devotional service is easier than the latter because so that means Nishkam Karma or Buddha Yoga or Bhakti Yoga is easier than Gyan. Devotional service is easier than the latter because being transcendental by nature, it frees one from reactions. In the second chapter, preliminary knowledge of the soul and its entanglement in the material body were explained. Remember that way back in chapter 2? Dehino Shminyata Dehe Komanam Yovanam Tara, that the soul goes from childhood to youth, old age, like that. How to get out of this material engagement by Buddha Yoga or devotional service was also explained therein. In the third chapter, it was explained that a person who is situated on the platform of knowledge no longer has any duty to perform. And in the fourth chapter, the Lord told Arjuna that all kinds of sacrificial work culminate in knowledge. And so, like I said before, however, at the end of the fourth chapter, the Lord advised Arjuna to wake up and fight, being situated in perfect knowledge. So you see how he could be confused, that chapter 4, the Lord told Arjuna all kinds of sacrificial work culminate in knowledge. So Arjuna's thinking knowledge, that means going off, that's Gyan, that's going off into the forest, I'm not this body, etc. But then Krishna says, stand and fight. Therefore, by simultaneously stressing the importance of both work and devotion and inaction in knowledge, Krishna has perplexed Arjuna and confused his determination. Arjuna understands that renunciation in knowledge involves cessation of all kinds of work performed as sense activities. But if one performs work in devotional service, then how is work stopped? Isn't that still working if you're doing devotional service? In other words, he thinks that sannyas or renunciation in knowledge should be altogether free from all kinds of activities because work and renunciation appear to him to be incompatible. He appears not to have understood that work in full knowledge is non-reactive and is therefore the same as inaction. He inquires, therefore, whether he should cease work altogether or work in full knowledge. So it's Krishna's plan that Arjuna has these questions so that we can learn more, right? And Arjuna's being confused gives Krishna the chance to, again stress further that work and renunciation are not opposites. Rather, we learn to work in a renounced spirit and ultimately for Krishna's pleasure. So again, Arjuna, he thinks Gyan means renunciation of work, and that knowledge and work are totally contradictory. And now we're going to hear that Krishna does not see it that way. Sri Bhagavan Uvacha Sannyasa Karma Yogascha Nish Reyasa Kara Uvao Tayos tu Karma Sannyasat Karma Yogo Vishishyate. The personality of God had replied, the renunciation of work and work and devotion are both good for liberation. But of the two, work and devotional service, and here, Prabhupada is using devotional service, karma yoga, nishkam karma yoga, is better than renunciation of work. Prabhupada says in the purport that, therefore, Gyan, or knowledge that one is not this material body, but spirit soul, is not sufficient for liberation. Just knowing you're not this body is not, of course, it's great. It's not sufficient. And then it says in italics, one has to act in the status of spirit soul. Otherwise, there is no escape from material bondage. Action in Krishna consciousness is not, however, action on the fruitive platform. So there's both have action, but a totally different consciousness. Activities performed in full knowledge strengthen, this is a beautiful sentence, activities performed in full knowledge strengthen one's advancement in real knowledge. So in other words, Krishna gives blessings so that we learn more and we understand more and we get deeper knowledge when we act in bhakti. Without devotional without Krishna consciousness, mere renunciation of fruitive activities does not actually purify the heart of the conditioned soul. As long as the heart is not purified, one has to work on the fruitive platform. So there's no escaping it, that only ultimately working for Krishna's pleasure is what frees us. Because just keeping the senses away from the sense objects doesn't purify the heart. It's almost like it's like a holding pattern. You ever? I'm trying to remember if this this used to happen in India. Sometimes, if the it happened before the pandemic to me pretty often when I'm flying around in India, and the airport is just packed with airplanes landing, so they put you in a holding pattern and you're circling around Delhi for for 30 minutes or something like that. It can be very frustrating, actually. So keeping our senses from the sense object is kind of like a holding pattern. It's better than just going crazy about sense gratification, but ultimately the plane has to land. Ultimately, we have to do some activities, and the activities will depend on if we have a higher taste. Remember chapter 2, verse 59 of the Bhagavad Gita, that param dristva, that higher pleasure of bhakti is what actually gives us the strength spiritually to renounce material sense enjoyment. So this is mentioned in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu quote later in this purport, Prapanchikataya Buddhya, that verse that you see. And the translation is, when persons eager to achieve liberation renounce things related to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, thinking them to be material, their renunciation is incomplete. Renunciation is complete when it is in knowledge that everything in existence belongs to the Lord, and one should claim proprietorship, and no one should claim proprietorship over anything. So that's renunciation. Renunciation is to think everything belongs to Krishna, and therefore everything should be used in his service. That's renunciation, not renouncing. And renouncing, so renouncing things that can be used in bhakti is false, right? So we say, oh, I don't want to watch because it's just a sign of materialism, right? But why not have a watch if you're going to be on time for artiques? If you're going to be on time for coming to the Bhagavad Gita class, right? So we're using the watch in Krishna's service, so it makes sense that. So renouncing the watch, taking the watch and throwing it out, that would be false renunciation because it can be used in Krishna's service. Right? So similarly, we don't take the computer and throw it out the door if we're using it in Krishna's service. Okay. Any questions on that or comments?
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. No question, just a comment on the last point which we discussed. Renunciation of work and acting in devotional work in devotional service. So also that renunciation of work will become very dry. The kind of condition we are in, even if we try to go to Himalayas and try to renounce everything and do tapasya, we might not be able to make it up for that.
Yeah, be very dry. Yeah. Now, of course, if we bring a Bhagavatam with us, and but even then, as Prabhupada once told Tamal Krishna Maharaj, he said to him, the goal is that everyone just come to Mayapur and chant Hare Krishna. But because you're so passionate, I've given you all these big projects to keep you busy in Krishna's service. And of course, other reasons, like, we make devotees by doing, but you get the idea. That's, and even Krishna told Arjuna is this great devotee. And he said, karma nevari karase, your adhikar is to work. It's not to go off into the forest. Yeah, thank you for
Thanks,
that, Vraja Prabhu. What does the KM stand for? It says Vraja KMD.
Prabhuji, KMD is Kripamaya Das, Varaha Kripamaya Das.
Ah, very nice name. Very, very, very nice name. Okay, anything else? So now Krishna continues this up through verse 6. So verse number 3, Gaya sa nitya sanyasi yona dvesti nakangshati nirdvanvo hi mahabaho sukham bandhat pramuchate. One who neither hates nor desires the fruits of his activities is known to be always renounced. So neither hates nor desires the fruits. He leaves the fruits up to Krishna. Such a person, free from all dualities, easily overcomes material bondage and is completely liberated, O mighty armed Arjuna. So Krishna uses the word nitya sannyasi. A sannyasi is meant to achieve liberation, and one who renounces the fruits of his activities, that's what they'll get. So such detachment, feeling neither hatred nor desire for the fruits of work, that's a sign of a true sannyasi. And then in text 4, Sankhya Yogo Pritagpala Pravadanti Napanditaha Ekam Ap Yastita Samyag Ubayor Vindate Phalam. Only the ignorant speak of devotional service, and here Prabhupada as well. He's even telling us, he translates Karma Yoga as devotional service, as being different from the analytical study of the material world Sankhya. Those who are actually learned say that he who applies himself well to one of these paths achieves the results of both. Can anyone remember a verse that we studied earlier that mentions Sankhya? No?
Sankhya philosophy is told by the Kapila Munis.
Yes, but in Bhagavad Gita, a verse that we already studied. I have a better memory than you. I find that hard to believe. Do you remember chapter 2, verse 39? Esa te vidita sankhya. And that it says, thus far I have described this knowledge to you through analytical study. Sankhya, the difference between the body and the soul, all those things in the second chapter, early part of the second chapter of the Gita. Now listen as I explain them in terms of working without fruitive results. So that's when it's mentioned. Oops. So Prabhupada writes, one process is to find the root of the tree, that's Sankhya, and the other is to water the root, that's Bhakti. The real student of Sankhya philosophy finds the root of the material world, Vishnu, and then in perfect knowledge engages himself in the devotional service of the Lord. So both karma yoga or bhakti and Sankhya, they involve renunciation. But what is the better way to renounce? Should one work with detachment or altogether renounce work? And Krishna keeps on saying throughout the Gita, he doesn't change his tune. These are not two paths with two separate goals, but are aspects of the same path, the same goal. And so how are they the same? I think I've given this example before that. Sankhya or Gyan is when you have to drop one thing before you pick up the other. But in bhakti, or just by dropping one thing, just by picking up this, you automatically drop that, right? So one becomes renounced just by doing bhakti. It's not that one has to first renounce and then take up bhakti. But no, just by taking up bhakti, renunciation comes. In the second chapter of the first canto, it says, Janayat yasu vaigragyam kyanam chaya rahoitukam. That one attains knowledge and detachment by performing bhakti. So I think it's pretty clear in our classes that bhakti is the goal, right? Bhakti is the process. So in text 5, we'll do 2 more and then take questions. There's the word again, sankhya prapyate stanam tad yogair apigamyate ekam sankyam cha yogam cha ya pasyati sapasyati. One who knows that the position reached by the means of analytical study can also be attained by devotional service, and who therefore sees analytical study and devotional service to be on the same level, sees things as they are. And Prabhupada writes, just as I said, in the first process, Sankhya, one has to become detached from matter. And in the devotional yoga process, one has to attach himself to the work of Krishna consciousness. So the verse begins with Sankhya Yoga. So Sankhya is basically Gyan, and yoga refers to Krishna consciousness or Nishkam Karma Yoga. So Krishna, clearly he's recommending devotional service, Karma Yoga, as a better way to achieve the goal, even though both Gyan and Karma Yoga lead to the verse here, Stanam Sashvatam, the supreme eternal abode. Okay, so again, like I'm trying to say, these are not two different paths with inferior or superior destinations, but rather there's two aspects of a path, one easy and one difficult. They have the same goal ultimately. So let's just do 6 and then we'll see if you have any questions. Sanyasas tu mahabaho dukkam aptum yogataha yoga yukto munir brahma nachire nadhigachati. Merely renouncing all activities, yet not engaging in bhakti or nishkam karma, cannot make one happy. But a thoughtful person engaged in devotional service can achieve the supreme without delay. So being thoughtful is what a bhakti yogi is. So you can't be happy by just giving up sense gratification without filling that void with something else. All right, so I'm not going to think about meat eating, illicit sex, intoxication, gambling, all these things. So the time I save from that, what am I going to do with my mind? Right? So we really need, so that doesn't help much. But all the time saved from thinking about and acting in those ways, if we use them in Krishna service, then we attain the Supreme without delay. Okay, so we covered a number of verses there. Any questions or comments?
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Can we go to the purport of 5.5?
Yep, 1 second. 5.5. Okay.
Srila Prabhupada writes that both are practicing, the outcome of both is the same. One is attachment and one is detachment. Detachment from matter and attachment to Krishna are one and the same. And one who can see these things as they are, or one who can see this sees things as they are. This seems to be apparently contradictory to what Srila Prabhupada wrote in the prior purport. One is seeking to find the root and the other is seeking to water the root. Can you just explain what seems to be an apparent contradiction here?
I'm trying to find the exact words in the purport to 5 that you're referring to.
The very end, factually both processes are the same, although superficially one process appears to involve detachment and the other process appears to involve attachment.
Okay.
So detachment from matter and attachment to Krishna are one and the same.
Okay. And
so my question was, this seems to be an apparent contradiction to what the analogy that Prabhupada uses in the previous, at least to me, I may be, of course, I'm wrong, I know. In the previous purport where Srila Prabhupada talks about the difference between the two is, one is you're trying to find the root, the other one is you're trying to water the root.
Right, and so we have to, I think if, it's obvious, back here on 5, English, sometimes hard to explain things. So detachment from matter and attachment to Krishna are one and the same. We know that they're not in one sense, because one can be detached from matter and not be attached to Krishna. But if one is attached to Krishna, one becomes detached from matter. So that's the point here. So real detachment, and that's kind of, Prabhupada's kind of bringing us in that direction when in verse, the purport to 2, when he quotes the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, that fake renunciation is not seeing, is when you try to just, let's see if we can, Prabhupada says it here, when persons eager to achieve liberation renounce things related to the Supreme Personality of God, thinking them to be material, their renunciation is called incomplete. So not bogus, but false renunciation is that dry renunciation, not seeing everything in connection with Krishna. And real renunciation, Yukta Vairagya, the next verse in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, which is not quoted here, is when you see everything in connection. Prabhupada paraphrases it, renunciation is complete. I'm in text 2 again. Renunciation is complete when it is in knowledge that everything in existence belongs to Krishna and no one should claim proprietorship over anything. So that's real renunciation. So detachment from matter and attachment to Krishna are one and the same, means they happen at the same time. So the English may be throwing us off a little bit, but they had, because that is explained Give me a second here. Oops. Let's see. 1, 2. So there we go. This is explained in the Srimad Bhagavatam. In this verse, very famous verse, Vasudeve Bhagavati Bhakti Yoga Prayojitaha Jana Yat Yasu Vairagyam Jnanam Chayad Ahoitukam. By rendering devotional service unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna, one immediately acquires causeless knowledge and detachment from the world. So we would say that real detachment can only happen ultimately in bhakti. In bhakti yoga. So going back to this sentence here that you just brought up, this sentence here, this one, detachment from matter and attachment to Krishna are one and the same. So true detachment only comes through attachment to Krishna. So that's my understanding here. It's not that the way it reads, I understand your question because you're right. The way it reads in English is, well, detachment from matter, gyan, and attachment to Krishna, bhakti, is one and the same. And we know that's not exactly the case. Now, another way to read this, by the way, they're one and the same because they are part of the same process. You know, first through karma, then gyan, then bhakti. A person who that's mentioned in the what chapter is that? Bahunam jamanam ante jnanavamam prapadyante vasudeve sarvam iti samahatma sadurlabha. Anyone know what verse that is? That I'm not getting my numbers right. It doesn't see. I don't think it's 9:20. Pretty sure that's no.
Prabhuji, it is 7.19.
7.19. Thank you. Whoops. So, oh, there we go. After many births and deaths, he was actually in knowledge. So when the Jnani becomes a Bhakta, he surrenders to Krishna, knowing him to be a cause of all causes and all that is. Such a great soul is very rare. So after many births, the Jnani becomes a Bhakta. Hopefully. I hope that answers your question. Navadvip Mataji.
So Prabhuji, if we go back to the shloka itself in 5.5, the translation of the shloka also says that and who therefore sees analytical study and devotional service to be on the same level, sees things
Right.
as they are.
Okay, so that means that's the point that I was trying to make before, that, you know, Krishna is not speaking about a variety of paths leading to a variety of inferior or superior destinations, right? He's describing two aspects of a path, one easy and one difficult, with the same goal. And, you know, these verses are applicable to anyone, whether they're trying for Brahman, Paramatma, or Bhagavan realization, but Prabhupada is translating yoga as devotional service, right? So they're having the same goal, but one is very easy and one is difficult. That doesn't mean, though, that you get the same destination. The person who doesn't have Krishna in their life is not going to get the same, but it is a spiritual quest. So that's what that means. Let me see if I can go back to, this is also described in 239. Well, yeah, it's similarly said in 239, right? That thus I have described this knowledge to you through analytical study. Now listen as I explain it in terms of working without fruit of results. O son of Pritha, when you act in such knowledge, you can free yourself from the bondage of works. So Sankhya can lead to bhakti. So, this is an example of having to see the full picture. So we know we don't want to, we don't want to just, they're not fully the same goals. Let's see, let's go back to, I'm jumping around on my computer here. One who knows, so you're 5-5, one who knows that the position reached by means of analytical study can also be attained by devotional service. So what is that position? The position of analytical study is renunciation, right? One who knows that the position reached by means of analytical study, that means renunciation, can also be attained by devotional service. So we know that, right? We read that verse in the Bhagavatam, that causelessly one gets, so yes, you get renunciation either by Sankhya or devotional service. And who therefore sees analytical study and devotional service being on the same level, sees things as they are. So they're not on the same level, but they're on the same level in terms of renunciation. When both, one can get some renunciation by analytical study or by bhakti. The analytical study is very difficult, bhakti is very easy. And as we also quoted, bhakti is full renunciation, whereas the analytical study is only partial renunciation. So from that point of view, but it's not like they're, we have to know the context. It's not that they're on the same level all completely, because later we're going to hear where Krishna says, Bhakti amama vijananti, only by bhakti can you understand me. And then he says in the end of the Gita, forget about Gyan, forget about karma, forget about everything. Sarva dharmam parityagya mamekam sharanam vraja. Just do bhakti. Everything else is a waste of time. That's his ultimate conclusion. But in this context, when we're talking about the question that Arjuna asked, yes, they can be, they're both leading to renunciation. Sorry, it took me a little time to get to that, but we always have to understand the context. Context is Arjuna's question in 5.1. First, you asked me to renounce work, then again, you recommend work and devotion. Now, kindly tell me what is the best of those two. Okay, that's my answer. It took me a while to get to it, but that's my answer. Is that all right?
Yes, I think that clarified a whole lot. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
Shamakunji.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Yes.
Just, I just had a thought on this, and I'd like your inputs here, Prabhu. Okay. Especially with respect to these verses here, which speak about Sankhya and Yoga, etc. When we read these very same text and commentary from, say, Baladev Vidyabhushan and Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, the message that comes is the first few chapters, like at least from 3rd chapter onwards, the goal of the yoga here is a perception of the Atma or realization of the Atma. And so the goal of this Jnana Yoga and the goal of Karma Yoga, it's mentioned explicitly as Nishkama Karma Yoga here when we look at the commentaries there. is the perception of the Atma. And much later, Krishna brings that, okay, higher than this perception of the Atma is service to the Supreme Lord. And when we look at Srila Prabhupada's purport and Prabhupada's translation, he doesn't bring about this notion of the realization of the Atma. And in fact, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says, okay, until 5th chapter, we have come to the perception of the Atma. From now, we'll go to the Paramatma. So going step by step, etc. But that's not what Srila Prabhupada is doing here. And I recollect hearing a series of lectures from the Uddhava Gita, where Krishna actually says similar to the way Srila Prabhupada is saying here in the Bhagavad Gita, that whatever you can get by jnana, you can get by bhakti. So it seems to me that the commentaries by Baladev Vidyabhushan and Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, based on which Srila Prabhupada has written this book, they take the narration or the intention of Krishna in one way. But it seems like the presentation is more towards the Uddhava Gita way here, the way Srila Prabhupada has given. And that's why for example, the Sankhya, analytical knowledge study, which finally leads to renunciation, that's mentioned with, like what you mentioned just now, is mentioned very explicitly by Baladev Vidyabhushan. But Srila Prabhupada wants to take both to devotional service. So my appreciation is Srila Prabhupada is singularly taking us to devotional service by resorting to our ultimate Shastra Praman, the Srimad Bhagavatam. Am I mistaken in my understanding here, or do you want me to caution me on anything here?
Well, I wouldn't say that the previous acharyas focus exclusively, as you were saying. For example, as I mentioned before, chapter 4, verse 9 is exclusively about bhakti. Janma karma chame divyam evam yoviti tatvataha. It's strictly about Krishna, the flute playing Supreme Personality of Godhead. So, and that's way back in the 4th chapter. And Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's commentary on 4:11, Yeyatamam prapadyante tam sataiva bhajamyaham, is about bhakti also. He writes that in whatever manner persons approach me, I reciprocate with them, this is the English translation, by giving them the fruits of their service. To those who think my Lord's birth and activities are eternal and worship me with desire centered on my personal pastimes, and in this way experiencing great happiness, I reciprocate in kind, being the Supreme Lord capable of doing anything, undoing anything, or making anything otherwise. I make such devotees my own parsadas, or perfect devotees, in order to make their birth and activities eternal. So that's Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's one comment on one verse in the 4th chapter. So I don't think we can just say everything that they're saying is like that. They also mention bhakti quite often in these early chapters. So and like you said, Prabhupada is he's dedicated the book to Srila Baladev Vidyabhusana, and he got much of his commentary from them. But as we pointed out many times, and as you're pointing out here, Prabhupada is very careful to always bring things to Krishna's ultimate. It's almost like you could say Prabhupada has read ahead in the book and he knows the conclusion, and he's making sure we don't get caught up in the distracted ahead of time. So thank you for bringing that up. But I just do want to point out that the previous acharyas also bring up bhakti in earlier chapters.
Yes, Prabhu. Yeah. Yes, Prabhu. Yeah, that's there. Yeah. Thank you, Prabhu. Yeah.
Okay. Now, Amol says, Hare Krishna, Prabhuji, the way I understand this is as follows. 1, karma yoga leads to work for Krishna. And if we are not doing that, then karma yoga is not perfect. That's true. You can do karma yoga before Krishna. right? Analytical study not leading you to the conclusion that Krishna is the cause of all causes, then the analytical study is imperfect. That's also true. Very good. So both are leading to same conclusion, and acting with this consciousness is something which is recommended because of that. Karma yoga is watering the root, and Sankhya yoga is leading to understanding root. So watering the root, ultimately watering the root is bhakti or nishkam karma or Buddha yoga. It's doing activities. It's again connected to that point about constitutional and conditional. When we understand that the root is that we are spirit souls, part and parcel of Krishna, then the bhakti is watering that root. If we're going to continue but still, for the most part, I agree with what you're saying, except that one point that it's not karma yoga. That it's really karma yoga. As service to Krishna, yes, is watering it. Okay. Let's see. Maybe since that's kind of the end of that section, maybe we will stop there. But let's see. Then what I'd want you to do is read up until 26, from 7 to 26. That's 19 verses. I might as well just finish the chapter. Read to the end of the chapter, and we'll see if we get to the end next week. How does that sound? Okay. So next week is Friday. Krishna willing, I will be in New York City next week. The only 99% chance that we will have class, the only reason we wouldn't, if that devotee is literally leaving his body and I want to be there chanting to him and putting a Govardhan Shila on his head and things like that. I got some really, this devotee had asked, I'll tell you this one thing, it's a bit of not directly related, but I think you'll find this interesting. This devotee, is still conscious, and some of the doctors were wanting to lessen his pain by giving him morphine. But he was concerned that the morphine might cloud his consciousness, or even, almost put him in like a comatose state where he can't remember Krishna. And so he asked me and some other devotees, what should I do? And I don't really know, but I did contact devotees, 3 devotees who have had a lot of experience with helping people leave this world. And they gave some really helpful advice, some practical and some on the practical side, some on the real spiritual side. Practically, they talked about how medication is a balance. Don't worry about giving some medication if it's needed, but not so much that that it fogs the consciousness. And they also said that actually the mental pain is usually greater than the physical pain when one is leaving the body, if one still has some attachment, some fear of the unknown, like that. They also said that try to make the mood in the room light and happy, not like really serious and somber. Nighttime, they said, was really specifically the most difficult time for a devotee leaving this world. And really try to focus them on the present. I mentioned that before, but encourage them that they've done so much, because sometimes the mind will lament about, I should have been a more serious devotee, like this. And these devotees who I spoke to Ritabhija Maharaj, Burijan Prabhu, and Shonaka Rishi Prabhu in Oxford. And another thing they said is encouragement. No, you've done so much wonderful service. Krishna only asks for a leaf, a flower, a piece of fruit, and look at all the seva that you've done. So really focus them on the positive, not the lamentation about the negative. I thought that was really sweet. That you've actually, this is a great legacy. And then surround the room with sacredness, nice pictures. It's okay for them to hold a Shalagram Shila in their hand or Govardhan Shila. And this was an interesting thing. Remember that the hearing is the last thing to go in the body, because sometimes we make the mistake. We think the person's comatose, and we start saying, I wonder when he's going to leave this body, or we start talking about politics or something like that. They can hear you. They can hear us. So really be very careful about what we say and what sound vibration is around a dying person. They said sometimes you can ask a person, what do you believe in totally, fully? What do you have absolutely no doubts about? When we asked that devotee, he said, the holy name and Prabhupada. So we said, okay, focus on the holy name and Prabhupada, since you have full faith in that. So those were a few ideas. Just thought I'd mention that to you. It's quite a science, it's quite an art, and it's quite a service to try to help a devotee leave this world nicely. Of course, Krishna will help also, but still we have service to do. So that would be the only reason we wouldn't have class. Without, I'd say 90% plus that we will. So thank you very much for great questions today, and thank you, Navadip Mansi, for that last question, because it went a little bit here and there, but I think we got the Krishna gave us the intelligence at the end.
No, thank you, Prabhu. It really deepened my understanding. That particular shloka was a little problematic for me, but it clarified a lot today. Thank you so much.
Okay. So have a lovely week in Krishna consciousness, and we will see you next week. Hare Krishna, glories to Prabhupada.
Thank you so much.
Prabhuji, Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. All the devotees are praying for their soul. So could you please tell the name so that we can also.
Yes, his name is Gopal Chandra.
Yes,
He's a disciple of Radhanath Swami. He's only 40 years old, but very, very nice. His name is Gopal Chandra Das. Thank you, Rasika Mataji. Thank you.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you.